Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Grégoire Larry and I'm the chair of the Queensland chapter for the SCRS. So today, we're having the AGM for the Queensland chapter, but we also have a presentation as well. So we'll start with a presentation and then we'll have question and answer for the presenters. And after that, we can go into the AGM side of the meeting today. First, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and live, and recognize their continuing connection to land, water, and community, and I pay respect to elders past and present. So today's presentation is called Seatbelts and Child Restraints used in children aged 0 to 12 years, and looking at the road crash of passengers in Queensland between 2004 and 2023. We'll have two people presenting today. So we have Fiona Boorman and Naomi Paulin, both from the Queensland Family and Child Commission. Fiona is the manager of the child death prevention at the Commission, and she leads the team responsible for maintaining the Queensland Child Death Register. An important part of her work is identifying risk factors, trends, and emerging safety hazards, which can be used to inform prevention initiatives and awareness campaigns. Naomi is the Principal Research and Special Projects Officer with the Commission, and she has extensive experience in child protection, most recently reporting on the complex interplay of factors that influence child and family safety and well-being. In her role, Naomi undertakes research on issues that impact child death and work in partnerships with researchers and other organizations with an interest in child death prevention and awareness to identify system challenges and to help reduce child mortality. So now that I've done the introduction, I will give the microphone to Fiona. I think Fiona will be starting. Do you have slides you want to share with us?
Yes, just let me have a look for the.
And
sorry, not so used to Zoom. So
yes, but usually we join a bit earlier to do all of these tests, but today the meeting was started a bit late. So
okay, and I just
another thing I just want to mention that the presentation is recorded. So if you have any issues with it, can you let me know?
So is that are my slides coming up?
So yes, we've got it's not the slide view, but we can see your screen with the slides. Yes.
Okay, is that the right slide view? Have you got the full slides?
We can see your notes as well. It's a presenter view that we see.
Is there a way to switch, Grégoire? Sorry, from present view? Maybe I.
Do you?
Let me stop sharing and I'll try again.
Yes. Do you have multiple screens on your computer?
Okay. Hopefully I've got it this time. Yes.
Yeah, that's good.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. And just to let you know, I have Courtney Rankin just in the room with me. She's a student placement from Griffith University, doing some work with us here at the Family and Child Commission. So thank you. Yes, I'd like to, just to start with, thank you for inviting us along to speak here today. And also thank Ione, who I think is a member of your college, who's suggested it, and we're in a group as well, the Spiro group. I just want to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. Here, I'm on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. I pay my respects to elders past and present. So I'm Fiona Boorman. I'll be presenting this first part, and then I'll hand over a bit later to Naomi. Oops, jumping ahead. So just a little bit about the Commission. The Commission is a statutory body in Queensland. We promote safety and wellbeing and best interests of children and young people. We also work with government and non-government agencies to improve systems, and we have, importantly, a legislated role to maintain a child death register. So the Child Death Register has been maintained since 2004. And it's really the purpose set out in legislation is to help reduce the likelihood of child deaths by identifying risk factors, patterns and trends. Also in our legislation is that we report each year on child death, and we also have an ability within the legislation to share detailed data for research and policy improvements, awareness raising, that type of thing. As an organisation, we're also keen to partner with researchers on projects, so just please keep that in mind. The other thing that you will see on the report is Safer Pathways Through Childhood. That is our framework to guide our child death prevention activities and is very helpful, which this report comes under that. Just before I move on to talking more about the report, I might just mention that the child death, the sources we have for keeping our register is primary information is death registrations from births, deaths and marriages. We also obtain police reports to the coroner, so they're very important for any of our reportable deaths, so deaths from transport crashes, for example, which provides detail on the incident, witnesses and other information. We also receive autopsies and tox reports, coroner's findings, child safety reports when children are known to child safety, and we have other sources of information such as media reports. Hopefully sounds all good, so do sing out, and I don't know if it's normal practice, but I'm very happy if you have questions, if anybody wants to intercede, although you might have to make some speak to for me to know, but I will keep going. So as I mentioned, I'm talking about this report, seatbelt and child restraint use in children 0 to 12 years. Really, it's a deeper analysis of our road crash child passenger deaths in Queensland from 20 years of data. It was released towards the end of last year, and our publication, this one plus others, can be found at the email address there, web address there. So the aim of this, just to talk about the aim of the report. So firstly, with now 20 years of data, we wanted to be able to look at the characteristics of the road crash deaths in this age group. The standard things you would imagine, the incidents of, and then looking at particular vulnerable subgroups. We wanted to look closer at restraint use and the type of restraint. We wanted also to consider whether there was that difference between legal restraint use in younger children versus best practice. Look at trends over time, and a part of the study we also looked at missing data, which I'm not necessarily going to be talking about here. Really, that is to improve, I guess, our practice of recording data. It's an important aim of the time in terms of timing was to inform the review of the Model Australian road rules. Now, you maybe are more informed about these matters than me, but what the Australian road rules for model law for the states and territories of Australia, and then the states and territories will adopt those model Australian road rules and usually within the 12 months. So that's the basis for that. And importantly, the Australian road rules were strengthened around child restraint systems were strengthened in 2010. So that was imposed additional requirements for older age groups. Up till 2010, there was only a requirement for children under the age of 6 months or up to the age of 6 months to be in a baby capsule or rear-facing seat. So that was really an important thing we wanted to do, but obviously we also used an opportunity to raise awareness of car safety and best practice. Before I move on, I might just give you a bit of an intro into information about the types of child restraints we'll be talking about today. So this comes from the Street Smarts website. You can see there, which probably only a year or two ago provided information, parent guide information on around appropriate types of seat, what the law says, and just some tips on when children should be in particular types of seat and so forth. In terms of illustrating those, on the right, we can see the rear-facing one. So that's for the very youngest babies and children, legally up to the age of 6 months, but we recommend longer. Forward-facing seats, then, they transitioned into that one once at the later stage. Booster seats are for the next group as they get taller, increase in size, and then eventually transitioning to adult seatbelts. So on this slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what compliance with the child restraint laws looks like. Now, the safest option for children is to remain in their seat, restraints, for as long as possible, and ideally until their shoulders go past the maximum height marker. And these are all marked on the child restraints available at the moment. And we also wanted to look at then the best practice, and just for the purpose of this reporting, we used best practice transition points based on age, but really the recommended points are when they reach the appropriate height as determined by the specs of the seat. So legally, in the table on the right, you can see that up to 6 months, they're in rear-facing seats, as I mentioned. Between 6 months and 3 years, there's a requirement to be either in rear or forward-facing seats. Between 4 and 6 years, forward-facing seats or boosters, and then from 7 and over, they must be in a restraint. However, for best practice, there's a big gap, as you can see. So best practice recommends rear-facing seats until they grow out of them, but that would be approximately up to 2 years, 18 months to 2 years before they transition. Between 2 and 4 years, again, waiting for that transition point where the shoulders go past the maximum marker before transitioning to forward facing. Between 7 and 9 years, either be in a booster seat or a 5-step, or use a 5-step test to transition that point to go to an adult seatbelt. And then for 10 to 12 years, providing they're tall enough, they can be in an adult seatbelt. So now going on to move to the data and what we had. So in total, over 20 years, there were 123 child deaths in road crashes over the 20 years. And you can see in the figure there, the numbers in the columns and rates in the orange line, and we have a trend line. So you can see there's quite a bit of variability. That numbers each year are relatively low. Child deaths are really rare events, we have to acknowledge. But what we can see that is very positive is just that strong decrease over time in the linear trend, 3.7% decrease per year in that trend line. So now I'm just going to look at the demographics in our 123 deaths. And looking first off at the youngest age group, so those on the top left there, age in years, you can see that the numbers are smaller, but in this group, the rate was slightly higher. But because the numbers are relatively small in our age groups, I would probably just be a little bit cautious with that. But there was a marginal decrease over those increasing age. I might just go then to remoteness on the top left, and you can see probably not a surprise to road safety people that attending, that there was a higher rate of transport deaths, road crash deaths in this age group in the remote and very remote regions of Queensland. Similarly, in measures by socioeconomic status, disadvantage, we can see in the most disadvantaged areas, so this is based on their area of residence, I think, the higher rates of fatality rates in those regions, residents of those regions. And then looking at the lower left, you can see analysis by for our Indigenous and non-Indigenous children. And here you can see that quite dramatic overrepresentation of Indigenous children in our fatality data. A factor, and I can't quite recall the stats, but it's approximate between 2 and 3, close to 3 times non-Indigenous children. We did also have a look at the remoteness and socioeconomic disadvantaged and the contributing factor to in our First Nations overrepresentation. But really we found that much stronger relationship with Indigenous status. And I'll go into that a little bit further later on. Sorry. Next. Sorry. Okay. Now this, leaving aside the demographics, we now wanted to look at the trends in restraint use over time. So this is any type of restraint that we looked at. And in this figure, we're looking at of the total deaths in 5-year blocks, what proportion were restrained, unrestrained, or where we had missing information. So you can see from that first column on the left, 2004 to 2008, in that 5-year block, 64% were restrained. However, there was 26% unrestrained, and a smaller proportion where it was unknown. And I might just comment on those ones where it was unknown. Our expectation is that in most of the time they were restrained. It was just the information wasn't available in the coronial documents that we looked at. But what we can see over time is that increasing proportion were restrained. And so that is obviously a positive thing that, and this is, I guess, taking on board, this is not this is a cohort of those children who died. This is not a survey of what restraints were being used in the general population of children. So this is an indicator in the fatality data, but I guess it is pleasing to see that a larger proportion were restrained in the more recent years. And if you consider that we've seen that strong decrease in fatality numbers over time, that increased restraint use is contributing to that. Now, noting earlier conversation around the road rules and that change in 2010, we wanted to have a deeper look at compliance with the 2010 restraint laws. And so this is just looking at that period from 2010 to 2023 to see what's happening there. And so here in this set, we then have 74 deaths in total. Of those, 58% were compliant with the laws, 32% were non-compliant, and 10% were unknown. Now, we then looked at some of our subgroups, and the only two I'm presenting here are First Nation status and known to child safety. Again, as I mentioned, we're getting to smaller numbers, so breaking it down for other groups gets to be really getting variability just due to the small numbers. But there is a very strong pattern there in the First Nation status, the high proportion of children who were not wearing any restraint, who are unrestrained. So going back to seeing the overrepresentation of First Nations children, the higher levels of lack of wearing restraints, sorry, a little bit roundabout, but that is really contributing to the higher overrepresentation in fatality stats. You can see compared, so as I mentioned, 64% were not wearing a restraint in the incident versus 73% in non-Indigenous children were restrained. The other area of interest for us is children under child safety. And for those unaware, in our child death stats, children under child safety are overrepresented in our fatality stats, particularly from external causes and sudden unexpected infant deaths. And that pattern is seen here too in restraint use. And I should just point out, when I say known to child safety, this is they're known to child safety in the 12 months prior to death. And that could be through either a notice of concern, a phone call to child safety where they look into it. There may be a child safety notification, or they may be in out-of-home care, in foster care. But those foster care is only a very small proportion of the ones we're seeing. Predominantly these are children where they are known through being, their family has been alerted to child safety through various means. So, oops, I think I'd finished on that. So the other patterns, as I mentioned, did show some jumping around, but the numbers were just getting a bit smaller in disaggregated groups. So this one is looking at the types of restraints that children were in just in that the same period, the 2010 to 2023, looking at some age group that we want to focus on for best practice use of the type of seat they were in. You can see in the 0 to 1 years, so that just over a third were in rear-facing seat as per the best practice recommendations. A quarter were in forward-facing seats, which is not optimal, and then a larger proportion with restraint type unspecified. So I beg your pardon, child restraint. They were in a child restraint, it just didn't specify which type of seat they were in. And as you go through the age groups, 2 to 6, 7 to 9, and 10 to 12, you can see that transition from very few of the 2 to 6 age group were in rear facing. A proportion were in the forward facing, and there were also a proportion in booster seats, but also adult seatbelts were being used, and again, restrained and type unspecified there. 7 to 9 years, really most where we have the information, we're in adult seatbelts, and then by 10 to 12 years, they're all in adult seatbelts. I should just mention, if it's not obvious, that this is only those where we had information that they were restrained, and not those where they were unrestrained were not looked at here. So what we can see in this figure is, from our point of view, that those premature shifts in seat type before children have outgrown their existing restraint. And the other thing that we note is that the Australian laws really don't reflect best practice, and they're notably behind other countries. I guess I might also just mention that in the period in the 2000s, the early part of this, there weren't appropriate seats for older age groups in transitioning into what is now best practice. So that was a consideration, that you can't make laws to mandate certain seat types for certain age groups if there aren't seat types available for those age groups. But they have made big advances over that time. Just commenting on international laws, so Australia is well behind other countries in that rear to forward transition point at 6 months. It's the youngest of almost all the developed nations. And for example, in New Zealand, the transition point from rear to forward-facing seats is at age 2. UK, Canada, and most of Europe, it's at 15 months, and most South American countries, were at 12 months. So I think if we had a closer adherence to best practice, we think that would increase safety. So just concluding on this report, we've seen that steady decrease in fatalities and a corresponding increase in restraint use over time. We saw those troubling findings for children who were not in any form of restraint, including an adult seatbelt, and really an evident need to improve passenger safety for First Nations children. The recommendations we made in the report really were to look at road safety rule changes that would increase safety were to increase that age, the rear-facing transition age, rear-facing to front-facing, to also look at the transition from booster to adult seat and make sure that includes the 5-step test. Probably more of a challenge for legal review, policing, but that isn't important because by that stage, children's sizes are quite variable between tallest child in a certain age and shortest child in a certain age. The other point, which I haven't really touched on here, was to increase the age at which children can sit in the front seat. For those unaware, those 2010 laws introduced that up to the age of 7, children must sit in the rear seat unless the rear seat is occupied by other younger children. We'd like to see that increased, that age increased, because it is safer in the back seat. Having a few acknowledgements there, Rebecca Shipston, who was the joint author, and also we had generous contributions from Department of Transport and Main Roads, from Susan Teards at KidSafe and Ruth Barker at Queensland Injury Surveillance Unit. So now I will just introduce you to we're doing a series of insights papers, and we're looking in these insights papers at a kind of, I guess, maybe some lower in total number deaths of children, but one of those topics where we can draw out some interesting findings. We have already released the paper on electronic scooters and bikes, which Naomi will talk to you a bit more in a few minutes. We're going to be releasing one soon on paediatric vehicular heat stroke, so children left in hot cars, plus quad bikes, side-by-side vehicles at a later date, and then waterfalls and animal bites. I'm going to stop speaking, but I'll keep running the slides and I will hand over to Naomi. Thank you. Go ahead, Naomi.
Great. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, everybody, for having us present today, and we really appreciate that. So, as Fiona mentioned, we are preparing a series of insight papers. So generally these papers provide an overview of data held within our register, including numbers and characteristics for child deaths in that particular topic we're looking at, common risk factors and injuries, legislation, regulations and enforcement measures, looks at a jurisdictional comparison, and the aim is to identify strategies for injury prevention and to improve safety outcomes. So if we just on the next slide, so I primarily will talk about our insights paper that looks at child deaths involving electronic scooters and e-bikes. So we have some data available here. So you will see that in the, I guess, the navy blue colour, that's our pedal cycle, so our bicycles. You can see over the years there has been a decline in the number of deaths that we have seen involving bicycles. With our kick scooters, it's remained relatively stable over the years. However, in the later sort of age year grouping, you can see that we've seen e-scooters rise there and the emergence of e-bikes. So in our register in 2005, we actually recorded the first death of a child that was involving an e-scooter. The second death was recorded in 2022, and then primarily most of the deaths from e-scooters and e-bikes have occurred in 2024 in Queensland. So in 2024, unfortunately, we did see 3 e-scooter fatalities and 1 e-bike fatality. So in total in Queensland up until 2024, we have had 6 child deaths involving e-scooters and e-bikes. When we looked at these deaths, what we found is that most children were aged 14 to 15 years. There were some outliers around 6 and 9 years of age. Children were primarily, they were male, with 1 incident involving a female. Incidents occurred mainly on a weekday during school term between 8 a.m. and 8:30, and then in the afternoon between 3 p.m. and 7:30 p.m. In most instances, the child was the rider of the device. They were riding on a road or attempting to cross a road and were involved in a collision with a vehicle. So additional factors that we found for the e-scooter incidents was that unfortunately the child was not following the general road rules. Often they were riding without adult supervision. So for Queensland at the moment, children do need to be aged between 12 to 15 years and supervised by an adult if they are riding an e-scooter. And we found that adult supervision generally wasn't present. Many of the children weren't wearing a helmet. Some children, it involved substance use. When there was an incident of a child riding at night, they were riding without a light. In 3 cases, the speed limit at the location of the incident was 60 kilometres or over. In Queensland, e-scooters are allowed to be ridden on roads that are greater than 50 kilometres an hour. And 1 e-scooter was found to have the capacity to travel up to 70 kilometres an hour. In Queensland, again, e-scooters are prohibited from exceeding 25 kilometres an hour. So certainly some concerning data that we found in terms of the use of e-scooters. So if we just move on to the next slide. Thank you, Fiona. So common risk factors reported in research, we also found them in our child death data and injury data that we looked at. So we did receive injury data from, excuse me, from Queensland Ambulance Service and Queensland Injury Surveillance Unit. So looking at that, some of the common risk factors were no helmet, inexperience in being able to ride these devices, underage riders, say being under 12 years of age or 12 to 15, not being supervised by an adult, the speed at which these devices were being ridden, mobile phone use can occur, and unfortunately, you know, we do see cases where more than 1 person is riding an e-scooter, and alcohol and substance use. So the combination of mixed use environments with limited protective infrastructure, device designs, and high-speed capability of the devices does create a complex safety landscape for young riders of e-scooters and e-bikes. So what we found was shared pathways, bike paths and roads. The young riders, they're travelling alongside pedestrians, cycles and other vehicles, which increase the likelihood of an incident occurring. E-scooters and e-bikes also travel near stationary objects such as parked cars and poles and on uneven surfaces where sudden stops or swerving can result in an incident. Another concern is around the design of the device. So small-wheeled e-scooters can easily topple over and they can be difficult to ride on uneven terrain. As we've seen, you know, in media reports, there are a lot of concerns around lithium batteries. So e-scooters and e-bikes are both powered by lithium batteries, which increasingly recognised as a serious safety risk for all riders. So due to the fires, which are highly flammable, they can be very difficult to extinguish as well. Devices can legally be ridden up to 25 kilometres an hour at certain locations. So travelling at speeds can lead to some concerns when you're trying to stop or maneuver a device. If a rider of an e-scooter or e-bike were to collide with another object or person and fall from their device, this could result in severe consequences such as life-changing injuries or death. And then a prominent one that we also see in the news, in the media, as well in the news and the media, is around illegal modifications. So owners sometimes are unaware that they're buying e-scooters that may not be compliant with law, or owners are taking it upon themselves to make some modifications to their e-scooters and e-bikes. So to improve safety outcomes and look at ending these preventable deaths and injuries associated with e-scooters and e-bikes for use by young people, the insights papers that we have available on the website looks at 3 different areas. So the first one being law and enforcement. So what we do have in our insights paper is advocacy around changing the legislation to set a minimum age of 16 years for the rider of an e-scooter. So as I'm sure the audience are aware, that there's current inquiry at the moment being undertaken in Queensland into e-mobility use and safety. We also are advocating for tightened and consistent regulation and law enforcement to ensure compliance for e-scooters and e-bikes, to enhance safety and injury prevention, and to make it easier for riders to understand and comply with the law. Safety information and road rules for devices. It would be great if it could be available at the point of sale, so everyone can be informed, better assist consumers to make informed decisions about the choice and type of device that they're buying a young person, and for families to have safety as their first thought when buying and riding e-scooters and e-bikes. We also look at engineering and research. So we believe there needs to be strengthened data collection, enhanced research and integration of emerging technologies to provide opportunities to anticipate the needs, better identify risk factors, trends and emerging safety hazards and accident hotspots that are involved in e-scooter and e-bike injuries and fatalities. Information can be used to help inform more holistic device design solutions, construction of more comprehensive off-street active transport infrastructure networks, and safety measures to help reduce road trauma for all road and path users. We're also calling for awareness, more awareness and education. We see that public awareness and education campaigns must appeal to young people and inform both young people and adults about the safe use of e-scooters and e-bikes and how these devices can safely exist alongside other path and road users. We have in our insights paper, consideration should be given to in-person learner training programs for young people and safe use of e-scooters and e-bikes that incorporates knowledge of road rules, hazard perceptions and practical riding skills, and how to safely maintain, park and store devices in an area that requires particular attention, particularly with relation to lithium battery risks. So that's just quickly sort of what our insights paper for e-scooters and e-bikes covers. We did make a submission to the inquiry and yeah, we're, I guess, looking at with keen eagerness to see what comes from the inquiry. So thank you. I'll pass it back to you, Fiona.
Thank you. Yeah, so that concludes our presentation. I've got on that last screen where you can find the reports on our Queensland Family and Child Commission Safer Pathways Through Childhood. We have the seatbelt paper plus the e-scooter insights paper, e-scooter and e-bikes. We also have done some other studies and the Safer Pathways framework itself. We've done other reports in drowning, pool drowning and immersion, and also sepsis mortality study. So just wanted also to encourage you to be aware of the capacity for us to share data with researchers. There's an application process for that, but we are more than happy to see the information used to inform child does safety initiatives. So thank you. I might stop sharing perhaps.
Thank you, Fiona and Naomi, for this very interesting presentation. And it was very good to have the two views, one in the car and one with the more recent uses of modes of transport. We can go and see if there's any questions. So you can raise your hand if you have any questions or write them in the chat. Maybe I can, if no one is asking right now, maybe I will start with one. So you were mentioning, Fiona, that Australian rules are not following the best practice. And I was wondering, given that you said that a lot of countries have much more advanced rules around the use of restraints for children, whether there was any difference that we could, in terms of the rates of fatalities that we can see from overseas?
I haven't looked into that at all, Greg. Well, it just looked at Queensland data for this one, and I think, as I mentioned during the presentation, at the time the 2010 rules were introduced, there may not have been those child restraints available for older age groups. So that was a consideration. I'm not exactly, I can't recall when we had a look at that. We just looked at the road rules as they were, or the restraint laws as they were at the moment, and didn't necessarily look into that. Given the, I think there would be so many other factors that would come into play, I would imagine, in other countries that that might be harder, but yeah. So it wasn't something we looked into.
For Naomi, so all of the issues that you've reported with e-bikes, e-scooter, and all of this, I think is happening in lots of other countries as well. So have you looked into whether they have different rules, or even in Australia in different states or overseas, and what would be the best approach? And most probably that must have informed as well your recommendations in the inquiry.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So we did look at other jurisdictions. So we did look across, I guess, Australia. So nationally, Queensland is the only state where children aged 12 to 15 can ride on roads while supervised. So there is another jurisdiction that is similar, but they can't ride on roads. Some jurisdictions are just still undertaking trials about whether or not they'll allow e-scooters on roads. So some are looking to go forward in that direction of allowing that. Others are a bit more hesitant. But we did look overseas as well at international jurisdictions. And we did find in some countries, like children had to undertake like a license. They may have had to have done some training before they could actually ride on the road with an e-scooter. So something that we don't necessarily have here in Queensland. And that's not only for, say, an e-scooter, it's just for general bicycle use as well. So that was really interesting to find that. So definitely there was a lot of differences, even in terms of registering. Some international jurisdictions require those kind of devices to be registered as well, where that's something in Queensland at this stage we're not requiring, which, can sometimes lead to, issues when there are accidents. We don't require registration. We don't require insurance either. So certainly there are other jurisdictions that do, I guess, have a higher level that they put those kind of devices against and what they require.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience? Anyone? I don't see any questions at the moment. I was wondering as well, Because you've shown that there's been quite an improvement in terms of child restraints and in terms of use and in terms as well on effects on crashes afterwards with reduction in fatalities. And because you've been looking at a 20 years period, it's pretty long. Do you have any idea what might have happened during that time that might have helped in increasing the child restraints and as a result reducing fatality? Any ideas about what was effective and what should be done to in the future and continue the trend?
I know that things, so, you know, in terms of vehicle safety, I'm sure there's been a lot of changes over time just to generally improve safety. I think those pushes to over time, so I haven't really talked too much about the particulars of child car restraints themselves. People like KidSafe are really the experts in that, who do all those fittings. But just the design of child car restraints has also improved over time. There are now mandatory standards, or the standards mandate having the height markers behind the shoulders to make it much clearer about when the transition points are. So those probably make that easier for parents to understand when it's appropriate to move, rather than just relying on what the law says, those kind of the minimum standards, let's say. So that has improved, but I think just generally there has been improvements in road safety for, you know, various things over time. The other thing to mention about KidSafe is that they do the fitting services in various areas. Obviously, that's limited to, I guess, population centres where they have places to do the setting, because often people may fit their child car seats, but if they don't follow the instructions carefully, they may miss some of those important steps that are protective there. I guess it's also important to note this, you know, this paper was not an analysis of whether the road crashes were survivable or not. So we have not made any assessment to that. Interestingly, we are just providing additional information to Ruth Barker, who's one of our partners at Queensland Injury Surveillance. She's a specialist child injury prevention person and also an emergency paediatrician. So she's actually looking at the information there and looking at the autopsies for those deaths where the only injuries appeared to be head and neck injuries with no other, you know, otherwise. So potentially the whiplash or other, that acceleration, deceleration in a crash, whether the different seat types may have or may not have made a difference to that if they were the other way around. Of course, that's going to be also a factor of whether the vehicle was hit from behind or was a rollover, or whether the collision was from the front. So that's something which is kind of beyond our skills to review, but we're hopefully getting Ruth to review that. We are part of the expert advisory group to the National Transport Commission on the review of the road rules, and Ruth Barker hopes to get some information out of that additional analysis to inform that.
And in your data, so Susan joined. In your data, you look a lot at the fatalities. Do you have anything on maybe serious injuries or other types of?
Not in this paper, and I think it would be, so we do for other purposes, such as the e-scooter paper, get injury data from either or both injury surveillance, which is hospital presentations, or from the Queen's ambulance call-outs. But from my knowledge, they would probably they're good at kind of the identifiable, because it's all based on search terms in the data, that hospital admissions data. So to actually know if a child presents with an injury and they were in a forward-facing or rear-facing seat, that is probably not going to be in the data that is collected to look in particular. That obviously restraint use probably might be, but yeah.
So you don't have an idea whether the trends you see in fatalities also occurs with injuries?
It's too difficult, I would say, to interrogate the data, looking at seat type in particular. So so they could look at road crash data and presentation or ambulance call-outs for those age groups, but not drill down into looking at what the seat type was. But yes, it would be, yeah, we didn't look into that. We do, having said that, we do collect the ambulance data and report that, but that is by broader age groups, not focused on the 0 to 0, the younger versus each subtype that we looked at.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? No, I don't see anything. Well, thank you, Naomi and Fiona, for presenting today and for answering the questions.